They buried her husband on a cold, wet morning in Savannah. By sundown, the same people who clutched pearls at the graveside were prying the keys to her future out of her hands. Emily Carter was 7 months pregnant, her 10-year-old son clinging to her coat, when her husband's family stripped her of the house she lived in and the company he built. All they left was a rust-eaten Ford van tossed to her like a piece of garbage. They thought they'd humiliated her. Years later, those same people would stand at her door, begging for help. But by then, the van wasn't just a van anymore. Would you have taken it, or would you have walked away? Tell me in the comments, and if you want more stories like this, hit like, share, and subscribe. The rain hadn't stopped when the service ended. Emily stood still as the last shovelfuls of earth hit the coffin, her son's small fingers tightening around hers. In the funeral home's back office, the air smelled of stale coffee and legal paper. The lawyer cleared his throat, reading from the will, his voice even. "To my beloved wife, Emily." The list began with the seaside house, the shares in Carter Marine, and then the 1975 Ford Econoline. She barely had time to register before her mother-in-law leaned forward, lacquered nails tapping the desk. "The house and the company stay with the family," she said, the word family like a gate slamming shut. "All you're entitled to is that old van. Take it or take us to court." A cold set of keys slid across the polished wood toward her. Emily's pulse thudded in her ears. She didn't argue, she didn't cry. She just wrapped her coat tighter around her belly, took Noah's hand, and walked out into the rain, the echo of their laughter following her to the street. That night, the rain followed them to the waterfront. The van coughed twice before the engine caught, rattling like it might fall apart with every turn of the key. Emily steered it toward the only place she could think of, an empty lot by the docks where the streetlights leaned low and the pavement glittered with rainwater. The wipers smeared more than they cleared, and inside, the air carried the scent of rust, oil, and something older, like the ghost of a life that had long since been packed away. Noah sat in the passenger seat, knees tucked up, his backpack balanced in his lap. He stared at the fogged-up window, tracing lines with his fingertip until the glass cleared just enough to see the hulking shadow of cargo ships in the distance. "Mama, are we gonna stay here forever?" His voice was quiet, almost swallowed by the drumming on the roof. Emily didn't answer right away. She reached across and brushed the damp curls from his forehead, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Just for tonight, baby. Just for tonight." She pulled a blanket from the back, worn thin and smelling faintly of cedar. Wrapping it around his shoulders, she told him to try to sleep, but his eyes kept flicking toward the dark beyond the windshield. Somewhere, a gull cried, its sound lost in the wind. When Noah finally curled up against the passenger door, Emily leaned back in the driver's seat, her hands resting on the swell of her stomach. She stared at the ceiling of the van, following the path of a slow drip that landed near the rearview mirror. Every sound, the creak of the frame, the sigh of the wind through the seams, seemed to press in on her, reminding her how little stood between them and the world outside. She thought about the house, about the warm light that used to spill from the kitchen windows, about the smell of bread on Sunday mornings. She thought about the moment those keys slid across the lawyer's desk, the metallic clink that still echoed in her head. A truck roared past on the street above, shaking the van on its tires. Emily's fingers tightened over her belly, as if shielding the life inside from something unseen. Her lips parted, barely more than a whisper escaping. "I won't let them take you, too." She closed her eyes, but she didn't sleep. The night stretched on, marked only by the distant hum of ships and the slow, steady breathing of her son. In that cramped, cold shell of metal and rain, Emily made a promise, one she intended to keep no matter what it cost her. Morning came without sunlight, just a pale gray seeping through the windshield. The rain had slowed to a mist, clinging to the glass in tiny beads. Emily's back ached from the driver's seat, but she pushed herself upright before Noah stirred. She didn't want him to see her looking as worn as she felt. She slipped out of the van, pulling her coat tight against the chill, and made her way to a corner bakery she'd spotted the night before. Inside, the smell of coffee and bread wrapped around her like a blanket. She counted out a few crumpled bills for yesterday's rolls, still soft enough for breakfast, and walked back to find Noah rubbing his eyes, hair sticking up in every direction. "Here," she said, handing him a roll and a paper cup of milk. He smiled, crumbs catching on his lips, and for a moment she let herself believe this could pass for normal. But normal didn't last. By noon, she was scrubbing tables at a waterfront cafe in exchange for tips and leftovers. Her hands, once used to arranging lilies and roses, now worked a sponge over sticky tablet tops. She kept her head down, ignored the sideways glances when customers noticed the van parked across the street. Every errand was a calculation. A thrift store sweater for Noah instead of one for herself. Gas in the van or fruit for the week. She chose both when she could, neither when she couldn't. At night, she sat in the driver's seat, sorting coins into a jar hidden beneath the passenger floor mat. One evening, as she wiped down the dashboard, her sponge snagged on a jagged seam near the back door. She leaned closer, frowning at a thin crack in the paint. A small flake of rust crumbled away beneath her thumb, revealing a glint, just for a second, of something warmer than steel. She froze, staring at it until Noah's voice called from the back, asking if they could read before bed. Emily pressed her palm flat against the spot, hiding it from view. She told herself it was nothing, just the way the light hit. Still, when she settled beside her son with the book, her mind kept drifting back to that tiny shimmer under the van's skin. The dockside wind rattled through the seams as Noah's breathing slowed, the words of the story fading in her throat. Emily stared at the ceiling, feeling the weight of the night, and somewhere beneath it, the faintest spark of something she hadn't felt in weeks, possibility. It was after midnight when Emily eased the van door shut and stepped into the damp air. The docks were quiet, only the distant groan of ships and the slap of water against pilings breaking the silence. She carried a small flashlight, its beam trembling slightly in her hand. She crouched by the back door where she'd seen it, a thin line of paint blistered by rust. The tip of her thumbnail dug into it, prying away another flake. More rust came loose, and there it was again, catching the light, a warm, unmistakable gleam. Her breath caught. She reached for the old utility knife she kept in her coat pocket, sliding the blade gently under the corroded layer. It gave way with a faint crack, curling back to reveal a smooth sheet of gold, dull from age but heavy-looking even in the shadows. Emily touched it with the pad of her finger. It was cold, solid, real. She sat back on her heels, staring at the hidden panel. Her husband's voice rose unbidden in her memory, from a night long before the sickness took him. "If anything happens, Emmy, the van will take care of you." She had thought it was just one of his ways of trying to make her smile, a joke about the old beast he refused to sell. Emily let the panel fall shut, the dull thud sounding louder in the stillness. She turned off the flashlight, pressing it to her chest like she could keep the secret there. Her pulse was too fast, thoughts tumbling over each other. How much could it be worth? How to move it without anyone noticing? And most of all, why had he hidden it here? Back inside, Noah was curled under the blanket, his face soft in sleep. She lowered herself into the driver's seat, the knife still in her hand, the smell of metal lingering in her nose. For the first time in weeks, her mind wasn't filled with only what they didn't have, it was filled with what might be possible. She closed her eyes and let the sound of the water fill the space between her thoughts. Not tonight, not tomorrow. But soon she would find out just how much her husband had left for her, and what it could mean for the life she still had to build. 2 days passed before Emily touched the panel again. She waited until the lot was empty, the last gulls wheeling off toward the horizon, and Noah was dozing in the passenger seat with a comic book draped over his chest. She pried the metal back with careful hands, the edge of her utility knife slipping under the seam. This time, she cut away a piece no bigger than her palm. Even in the dim light, it glowed, heavy and warm in her grip. She wrapped it in an old dish towel, tucked it into her tote, and drove across town. The pawn shop sat between a liquor store and a boarded-up diner, its neon sign buzzing in the overcast afternoon. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cigarettes and old carpet. A man with silver hair and a magnifying loop around his neck looked up from behind the counter. Emily placed the wrapped bundle in front of him without a word. He peeled back the fabric, and his eyebrows lifted just enough to register recognition. "Where'd you get this?" he asked. She met his gaze. "Family heirloom." He didn't push. Instead, he weighed it, scribbled a number on a slip of paper, and slid it toward her. Emily's throat tightened. It was more money than she'd seen in months. She nodded once, took the cash, and tucked it deep into her coat pocket. By evening, she and Noah were sitting in a booth at a small diner, steam rising from plates of real food: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, fresh greens. Noah grinned at her, cheeks full, as if this was the best day in a long time. Emily smiled back, but kept her thoughts to herself. Later, after he'd fallen asleep in the van, she counted the bills under the glow of the dashboard light. Most went into a thick envelope, hidden under the floor mat on the passenger side. The rest she used the next morning to buy a warm coat for Noah, prenatal vitamins, and a pair of sturdy shoes for herself. As she walked back to the van, grocery bag in one arm, the coat in the other, she felt a weight she hadn't realized she was carrying start to shift. The gold was still there, hidden and silent, but it was no longer just a secret. It was a plan taking shape, one she would move on slowly, carefully, until it carried them out of the cold. The first sliver of spring came with a break in the wind off the water. Emily used part of her hidden envelope to rent a tiny corner stall at the Saturday market, a space barely big enough for a folding table, a bucket of fresh-cut flowers, and her. She started small. Bundles of daisies, mason jars with tulips, a few arrangements she crafted from discount stems at the wholesale lot. On her first morning, she set the table before sunrise, her hands moving with the muscle memory of years ago, when flowers had been her living, not a luxury. People paused, some just to glance, others to run their fingers over petals, to breathe in the scent. A fisherman's wife bought a jar for her kitchen, saying it reminded her of her wedding day. A young man picked out 3 roses, cheeks red as he explained they were for a girl at the diner. Every dollar Emily made went back into the stall. A sturdier table one week, a hand-painted sign the next. On days when she needed extra stems, she cut another small panel from the van, taking care never to leave marks anyone might notice. The pawnshop owner had stopped asking questions, simply counting out the bills and nodding. Noah became her helper, handing over blooms with a shy smile, learning the names: peony, freesia, ranunculus. Customers began remembering them, stopping to chat, asking if they'd be there again next week. But not everyone looked kindly. One afternoon, Emily overheard 2 women from the market's main row whispering, eyes darting toward the lot where the van sat. "That's her," one murmured, "living in that thing, selling flowers like it'll change anything." Emily's back stiffened, but she didn't turn around. Instead, she wrapped a bouquet for the next customer with steady hands, her smile unwavering. That night, as she packed the unsold blooms into jars for the van, Noah pressed a crumpled $5 bill into her palm. "Tip from the man who bought the sunflowers," he said, grinning. Emily closed his fingers over it, telling him to keep it for something he wanted. Driving back to the dock, the van rattling in the cooling air, she glanced at the panels along its walls. The gold was still there, patient and quiet, but it was the flowers that were beginning to change things, rooting her back into the world, petal by petal, sail by sail. By the time summer rolled in, the market stall could barely hold the life Emily had built into it. The buckets overflowed with hydrangeas, lilies, roses in every shade, and people now came looking for her by name. She saved every extra dollar, tucking it into the growing envelope under the floor mat, until one humid afternoon she walked past a vacant corner shop on Bay Street and stopped. The windows were dusty, the paint chipped, but the light poured in from 2 sides, and Emily could already see it. Rows of flowers in the window, a counter in the corner, Noah sitting by the register sketching in his notebook. That night, she spread the rent contract out on the dashboard, the gold from the van covering the deposit without denting the envelope too badly. 2 months later, Noah and Rose Florals opened its doors. The name was painted in gold across a deep green awning, the bell above the door chiming each time someone stepped inside. The air was heavy with the scent of eucalyptus and fresh blooms. Emily wore a navy dress she'd found secondhand, but fitted like it was made for her, her hair pinned neatly back. Customers wandered in from the street, some following the smell, others drawn by the displays she arranged each morning before sunrise. She remembered anniversaries, sent handwritten thank you notes, slipped an extra sprig of baby's breath into bouquets for luck. Word spread fast. This was the shop where you were remembered. The van stayed parked in the side lot, still carrying its rust like armor. A few regulars noticed it and asked about it. Emily only smiled, saying it had been with her a long time. One evening, as she locked the front door, Noah came running down the sidewalk waving the latest newspaper. There, on the business page, was a headline about Carter Marine, her late husband's family business, filing for bankruptcy. The accompanying photo showed the once grand Carter estate, now with a foreclosure sign planted in the front yard. Emily read the article without a change in her expression. She folded the paper neatly, set it aside, and turned the shop's sign to closed. The gold lettering on the awning caught the last light of the day, gleaming just enough to reflect in her eyes. She didn't smile, but she didn't look away either. It was late afternoon when the bell above the shop door chimed. Emily glanced up from wrapping a bridal bouquet, her fingers steady, as two figures lingered in the doorway. Her mother-in-law stepped in first, thinner now, hair limp, eyes darting around like a stranger in her own skin. Claire followed, clutching a worn handbag to her chest, her gaze lowered. They stopped just inside, the cool air scented with lilies and eucalyptus. Around them, shelves brimmed with blooms, sunlight slanting through the windows onto polished floors. Customers near the counter glanced over, sensing the tension. "We'd heard about your shop," her mother-in-law began, voice scratchy, each word pulled from somewhere reluctant. "The house is gone. The company's finished. We need a place to stay, just for a while." Emily didn't look up immediately. She slid the bouquet across the counter to the bride waiting patiently, tying off the ribbon with a final pull. "Congratulations," she said softly, the bride's smile cutting through the thick air for only a second. The bell chimed again as the bride left, the shop falling into a deeper quiet. Only then did Emily raise her eyes. "Do you remember," she asked, each syllable measured, "the day at the lawyer's office, when you told me the van was all I deserved?" A shadow passed over her mother-in-law's face. Claire shifted uncomfortably, her eyes drifting toward the front window. Outside, the van sat in its usual place, rusted and still. But the low sun struck its metal, sending a flash of light into the room. Claire's gaze flicked from it to the gold lettering on the awning, to the pen in Emily's hand, to the gold-trimmed vases in the display. Realization widened her eyes. Emily's voice stayed even. "This shop is my home, and there's no space here for people who tried to break it before it began." No one moved. The only sound was the faint hum of the cooler in the corner. Her mother-in-law's shoulders sank, years of authority collapsing inward. Claire's mouth opened as if to speak, but nothing came. They turned without another word. The bell over the door gave one last soft chime as they stepped out into the street. Emily stood still for a long moment, the scent of roses wrapping around her like armor. Then she turned back to her workbench, hands steady, the distant sound of their footsteps already fading into nothing. The sun was sinking low, painting the shop in amber light. Emily stepped outside with a broom, sweeping petals from the doorway. Across the narrow lot, the van sat where it always had, its panels dulled by years of salt air, a quiet sentinel to everything that had happened. Inside, Noah was rearranging a display of lilies, his taller frame a reminder of how quickly time had moved. Beside the register sat a sketch he'd been working on, pencil lines tracing the curve of the van, its rust rendered with the same care as the flowers in the shop. Emily paused to look at it, her fingers brushing the edge of the paper. She glanced back out the window. In the fading light, the van's rusted skin seemed to drink in the sunset, turning it into something almost golden. She thought of the first night she'd slept in it, rain tapping against the roof, fear pressing down on her chest. She thought of the nights she'd sat in the driver's seat, counting coins and promises, of the first panel she'd pried away with shaking hands. Noah came over, wiping his palms on his apron. "You've been staring at it again," he teased gently. Emily smiled faintly. "It's part of the story." They stood together in the shop's front room, the scent of eucalyptus and lilies mingling in the warm air. Emily's gaze drifted to the back corner, where a stack of gold-trimmed vases caught the light. The gold had bought her time, bought her choices, but it was her hands, her stubbornness, and the steady rhythm of petals and stems that had turned those choices into a life. The bell over the door rang softly as the last customer left. Outside, the street lamps flickered on, casting pools of light along the sidewalk. Emily locked the door, flipped the sign to closed, and stood for a moment with her palm pressed to the glass, watching the van. It hadn't moved in years, maybe it never would. But it had carried them through storms, through hunger, through the hollow ache of loss. And even now, it carried the weight of a secret only she and her husband had shared. Emily exhaled slowly, her breath fogging the glass, then turned back to Noah. "Come on," she said, reaching for the lights. "Let's go home." The van stayed in its place, rust and gold hidden beneath the skin, as the shop door clicked shut behind them. A week later, the air in Savannah was warm and heavy with the scent of blooming jasmine. The shop door was propped open, letting the breeze carry in the sound of gulls from the waterfront. Emily stood behind the counter, tying the last ribbon on a bouquet, when a middle-aged man lingered by the entrance, his eyes fixed on the van in the side lot. "That old thing yours?" he asked, stepping inside. Emily glanced toward the window. The van sat in its usual spot, a shadow among the flowers spilling from the shop's planters. "It's been with me a long time," she said, her voice even. "Got a story behind it?" he pressed, curious but polite. Emily's fingers paused on the ribbon. She thought of the cold rain the night she first slept inside it, of Noah's small voice asking if they'd live there forever. She thought of the first glint of gold beneath the rust, the slow, quiet transactions that turned fear into stability. She thought of the morning she signed the lease on this shop, the gold lettering above the door catching the sun. She set the bouquet on the counter and met the man's gaze. "It's just a part of a longer journey," she said simply, "one I wouldn't trade for anything." Noah emerged from the back room, now taller than the counter, carrying a bundle of fresh lilies. He set them in a vase, flashing her the same smile his father once had. Emily felt the weight of the year settle into something softer. Gratitude, maybe, or just peace. Outside, the late light brushed the van's panels in a way that made them almost shine. To anyone else, it was just a tired old vehicle. To her, it was proof that even what's thrown away can hold the key to freedom. She turned back to the customer, ringing up his order. "Enjoy the flowers," she said, and meant it. As the door closed behind him, Emily looked around the shop, her shop, alive with color and scent, with the murmur of Noah humming as he worked. She thought about all the people who doubted her, about the nights she'd nearly believed them, and about the choice she made not to give up. Sometimes the gold in life isn't metal at all. It's the will to keep going when the world hands you nothing. And when you find it, you protect it. If you were handed something everyone else thought was worthless, what would you do? Tell me in the comments. And if this story moved you, like, share, and subscribe. Your support keeps these stories alive.